I think Paul Chirakarod is not the first Dalit translator in India. He's the second. The first is another Malayalam writer, T.K.C. Vadidala, whose Katim Koithum was published in 1960, 2 years before Paul Chirakarod's Puletara. Now, the significance of the translation, I'll speak about that, what translation can do, since that was the question that she addressed first. Paul Chirakarod passed away in 2008. I think it was around that time that OUP commissioned the anthology of Malayalam Dalit writing, and the editors decided to include an extract from Puletara. Then it was that they found they could ascertain the existence of just one copy of the novel in entire Kerala, a very tattered copy in the state capital's public library. Now comes the interesting part. After the release of the anthology, National Book Trust brought out Chirakarod's biography of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, which is a monumental text. Then OUP commissioned the translation of Puletara, which was around 2011-12. And then 2014, a private publishing house in Thiruvananthapuram, Raven Books, brought out 1,000 copies of Puletara in Malayalam, the source text. Most recently, Malayalam Manorama, which is a leading publishing house in Kerala, they brought out a second reprint of the novel, of the source text. So, if you ask what translation can do, Puletara was published in 1962. For 5.5 decades, this text was marginalized and eclipsed and kept out of the Malayalam Bhasha terrain. But the visibility conferred by translation made printing the source text unavoidable. So, and that in turn provided a rebirth, it enabled a rebirth of the text and the author in the source language. You can't ask for a more dramatic instance of what translation can do.
Thank you. Thank you. Anitha, I'd like you to share your thoughts on both writing and translating. I was reading Owen Pamuk just last night, looking for clues to ask you, and he talks about breaking the bones of language. And of course, his translator, Maureen Freely, is actually whom we are reading, not Pamuk himself. So please talk about crossing over from one language into another. How do you, this is something actually Catherine came up with when we were talking what sort of questions to raise for this, to share with the audience. She said, ask Anitha how she chooses those poems that she would like to see in translation. Also, who are the translators who approach you? Or, I mean, do you invite your translators or do they come to you and say, we'd like to translate this? Venkateshwaran, Devika, Lakshmi Rajiv. Could you share some of your thoughts here?
I translate poetry only. I have translated poetry, only poetry. And I have translated a text on poetry, related to poetry. It's an autobiographical note of a poet, a Palestinian poet. But the point is, the reason why I translate is the language of the text, whatever it is. It has never been the content of the text. Basically, poetry, we all know, is a language, art. So when I read, So when I read a poetry, a poem, you know, there is this curiosity, how can I capture this in my language? What happens? How does it appear? So certain poems excite you like this and you can't escape it. I've never been commissioned, I've never translated anything when somebody has asked me to translate. I've always chosen what to translate on my own. For example, the text which I said now, I Saw Ramallah, which is an autobiographical narration of the Palestinian poet Murid Barghouti. This was given to me as a gift, and it was lying there because it was a Palestine issue. I thought I knew, so let me read it later. Then one morning I was flipping through the pages and oh my God, what a language. What a language. It was an English translation done by Ahdaf Sayouf, the Egyptian novelist. Wonderful. So then I had this temptation to see, can I capture it in my language? How does it appear? Then I started doing it. I only intended to do a few passages to see. And I ended up doing the whole text, which was the power of the language, which demanded me to translate it into my language. So that's how it always appears. And also in poetry, I have felt, if translators are sitting here, many will definitely know, I don't know if you people also have experienced this. You may write in English or Spanish or Hindi or Tamil or whatever, you have a language in which you write, but poetry also has a universal language which transcends. This, this Australian poet, Les Murray, I was translating him, and you know, it started, he writes in English, and his English is not the English which I was used to, Australian. No, it's not. It's an English, but it's not quite the English we are used to reading. It's a Dravidian English, if I could say that. Then it started flowing and fitting itself into Malayalam as if Malayalam was a vessel into which it wanted to fill itself in. Beautiful experience. So I translated. So these are the translation experience, and you know, this is how it gets triggered.
Thank you. It's an interesting thing that poetry has a universality which fiction does not. We've had lots of problems world over. Anyone who's handled translations knows this. Some of our fiction, when we try to sell it outside, I remember Urvashi Butalia saying that when she was marketing some texts, some works of fiction, the Japanese publisher said, please don't give us any book which has more than 5 people in it. We can't handle that many names. So Urvashi said, perhaps there are only 5 people in your life. So, I mean, and lots of all the other complexities of our culture which don't travel through fiction. Poetry, it appears, will jump over all those walls. I'd like you to read a bit of your poetry, and even I was looking at the translation, 2 translations of the same thing, which is Virti, cleanliness. Devika calls it cleanliness, Lakshmi Rajiv calls it neatness. Just the last 2 lines. The torn old rag is now all wet, and someone's wiped me off the floor. That's Devika. Lakshmi says, even after turning over, struck by the finger accidentally, someone is swabbing me up, wetting the old cloth. Can you recite your Malayalam? Do you remember? You can't. Okay, can you comment on? Okay.
It's titled Vritti. I remember everything I have written. വിരൽ തട്ടി മറിഞ്ഞിട്ടും പരന്നൊഴുകാൻ വിടാതെ പഴന്തുണി നനച്ചാരോ തുടച്ചെടുക്കുകയാണെന്നെ. These are the 4 lines. The translators have taken their freedom because, you know, because it's a language art, as we were talking. Without taking some freedom, it's very difficult. Otherwise, you will only be able to translate the meaning. You will not be able to translate the poetry unless you are exceptional in both languages and you are a poet yourself. I don't want to comment on these translations because both of them are good, is what I
Right,
feel.
okay.
But they are different, and both of them are different from the original in
Yeah.
certain ways.
I just wanted to demonstrate that there are different ways of translating the same work. And all of them have their value, and each generation sometimes demands their own translations of important works. Kath, could you comment, since Malayalam is the focus language, and you've lived with translation for 20, 25 years, both as a teacher and as translator, could you comment on the speed with which works are being translated from Malayalam today? It's become visible over the last 10 years. It's, I think, won the most number of prizes. And it never used to be that way. Could we turn this off, please? Earlier it used to be Hindi, Marathi, and Bengali which were leading, but now it looks like Kannada, Tamil, and Malayalam have come to the forefront. I'd like you to talk about what are the 3 things you would like to see as improvements in the present situation. As a translator, dependent on publishers to publish your works. Would you like to comment on that? Yeah, what are things you would, let's say 1 or 2 improvements, and what are the 2 good things that you'd see?
Yes, in the past few years, Malayalam has done exceptionally well in translation, and Malayalam translators have really been able to, I'm talking about fiction, have been able to showcase the stylistic and thematic virtuosity of the original very well. In fact, I was just going through the crossword awards. Out of the 17 crossword awards, 9 have been won by Malayalam. So that is quite an achievement. And this has led to increased visibility and wider readership. But I still feel that publishers and distributors are not doing enough to promote translations. For example, I forgot to bring the copy of Pulethara. I could not find a single copy. I tried to buy it from 3 stalls in the airport. I couldn't find it.
Don't look at me. Thank you.
Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is more academic. I would like things to change in the curriculum designing of our courses, our English language courses, because it's not just into English that we are translating. We have so many recognized regional languages, and for example, Kocheriti was translated into 5 regional languages plus French. So what I want to see is that right now we have this tendency to categorize texts. We offer a lot of optional papers like Dalit literature, translation literature, gender literature. This all looks very impressive on the university syllabi. But if you look closer, you'll see that very few colleges opt for these optional papers. And the academic community is generally very conservative, and they do not like change. So what I feel is that translated text, instead of being, under one collective noun, they should become part of the mainstream syllabus, both in the English language syllabus as well as in the other regional language syllabi, because it is through translation that we know about India and the diversity of India. For instance, Pulayatara, which talks about the marginalization of the so-called untouchable community. It would be so much better in today's India. I suppose it's political enough. It's not unpolitical to speak about it, but in today's India, it would be much more relevant if we included a Puletara in the BA English uh, core curriculum rather than, say, a Wuthering Heights.
Thank you. Yeah. They are difficult texts to teach.
Yeah.
It's a very fraught atmosphere.
Yeah.
Passions run high.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I published a collection of Dalit writings in a textbook form on demand from the academic community, but not a single place prescribed it because I think it was too difficult to bring into the classroom. But it's doing very well as individual purchase, online purchase and all that. Coming back to poetry, um, one often thinks of the poet as an isolated figure, the solitary quality of writing. Translating too, but at least you have your editor to work with.
Yeah.
But a poet, would you like to comment on how a poet functions? You surprised me when you said it's not the content or the subject, it's only the language that controls and powers your work. Please talk about the way a poet, the way you work. Do you consult with poets? Do you have poetry readings? You said literature festivals are good that way, but please share that. And how long you've been writing, and how as an engineer you manage your engineering and your poetry writing.
Yeah, isolation. Physical isolation, well, I don't think so, because all through my life I worked in a factory and amidst a lot of noises, roaring machines and shouting people and dust and din and, so physical isolation, leave it. But I think poetry is there in the air, in the soil, in the water. It is in the air, and it squeezes itself into you, maybe through every follicles, something like that, and it works on its own. And you will need an inner space and an inner time for the poetry to happen. The element is there. So you make yourself conducive to that happening. That's what I have felt. And my way of writing, I'm not a very prolific writer. I write maybe 5, 6, 7 poems a year at the most. I've been writing since I was very small. I did my engineering as a course, everyone did, I did. It was not a specific choice for me. I studied that because I needed a job. These things, how it happens, especially in my generation. This has been happening. So I did, but I think it was good for me because when I look back, when you learn science and some applied science like engineering, you will develop a certain regard for clarity and precision of work, which actually indirectly has helped me in my own writing, is what I think.
Thanks a lot. That was great.
Can I add my bit?
Yes, yes.
For me, translation, I too was working. Most of my translation was done when I was working. So I couldn't spend more than 2 or 3 hours a night for translation. But what I found is that once you take up a text for translation, it's there at the back of your mind all the time. Some days you wake up remembering one line from the source text. Another day, you wake up and you feel that line that I translated in that way that day, that is not nice. That line has to go there and this phrase has to be changed.
A bit like looking after your children.
Yeah. And I was telling my daughter, it's like surrogate motherhood. The inspiration is not yours, the authorship is not yours, but you go through the entire birthing process. And, but it's a wonderful experience.
Many people say when they finish a work, they feel terribly abandoned, some sort of desolation because it's over. Extending what we talked about for both of you, in fact, subject themes. You notice Not this year or not the last year, but novels that become prominent, I won't say eminent always, that catch the public eye, that are widely read, widely discussed. Sometimes it's as if the whole writerly community is thinking along the same lines. You know, there'd be 2 or 3 novels, like there was Exit West and Arundhati's novel. Um, you know, it's about global terrorism. It starts in Pakistan, something from Beijing, something from Paris. Um, is there something like that, you think, in literature? Or is it just a coincidence that it happens to sometimes, you know, just it's the historical novels? And it's also amazing how novels, fiction has become so important. At one time, fiction was not considered worth study. It was only poetry and, you know, the classical stuff and things like that. Could both of you share your thoughts on this? Are you influenced by it? That's the other thing I want to ask you, Anitha. Does it influence you?
Of course, everything which is happening around influences us as social beings. But your observation on writing on contemporary themes, what it brings to my mind is a comment, an observation by Sylvia Plath in her diary. I recall that she wrote, one of the editors told her that in England, if you have a night rain, the next day he receives hundreds of poems on rains. So before he closes office on the next day. I think it's because poetry seemingly is a, you know, it's most intimate expression. It has this ability to contain short expressions, and it's seemingly easy, though it is not really easy if you look at it. So people have a tendency to respond in poetry. And also there are other reasons, like in languages, in cultures where there is oppression, you know, poetry can smuggle in certain things. It does not it's not very explicit, so you can smuggle in your, you know, otherwise potent content into it. So women and other oppressed classes in such communities tend to write in poetry. Of course, that's all. And also there is another thing, the technology-enabled writing in the social media, in your mobiles and all. It helps you to break the existing institutional setup of, you know, literary institutional barriers which was there before, and you can write something and you can publish it to, it can reach any number of people. So that's again a temptation. So all these things have, you know, perhaps promoted quick writing, fast writing. It has its advantages. While appreciating that, I also think that art requires time. Time is an integral part of any artwork. It needs time to take shape and to come on its own, which is, so this quick writing, quick responses through the medium of poetry.
It's hostile to the poetic.
It actually it actually does not give the work a fair chance to face, you know, its maximum, to reach its maximum.
Thank you. I believe there's a huge submerged body. Yeah, before you talk, but I want to just bring this up. Talking about things that are not revealed, there's a huge submerged body of work called Arabi Malayalam. Jershi was talking about it. Do you know anything about it?
Yeah, Benjamin has written about it.
Okay.
Recently, his recent novel, I
No,
think,
lots
brings
of women,
it out.
and also women have written.
Yeah.
But they don't really want to be known
Yeah.
as having written.
Yes.
You were going to say, because we also need to open this up to the audience if they have questions. Yes.
What was I going to say? Where did you leave?
You're talking about common themes.
About common themes coming. Now, more than, yes, common themes do come up, and contemporary themes are generally addressed, but it's more successfully addressed in short fiction, in short stories, rather than in novels, because as she said, novels take time and you need to, yes, and take Arundhati Roy's second novel. The first one, the Booker Prize, the second was just Was it a runner-up? I don't know. I don't think it was even shortlisted. And many call it a flawed novel. But it took her such a long time for writing, and I'm sure when the, the colander of time sieves out the dregs, I am sure the second novel is going to survive because there is intensity of feeling in this. Short stories are different. In short stories, you can write, for example, N.S. Madhavan is a wonderful example. You have, immediately after Indira Gandhi's death, he wrote Vanmarangal Veerumbol, quoting that line from Rajiv Gandhi's sentence, when big trees fall. Then, immediately after the Gujarat riots, he wrote Nilavili, which I translated as The Cry. Now, short stories can do with contemporary topicality, and you have many writers, and he's one of the best, of course.
Thank you. I close by sharing something with you that really struck me. Ambai said, C.S. Lakshmi said, the Tirukkural has these very, very pithy, powerful aphorisms. And she said, it's like piercing a mustard seed and pushing 7 oceans through it. Working with her translator, Lakshmi Holmstrom, she said, translation is like that. If anyone in the audience has any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Seeing the Goethe Institute being involved in this literary festival, I may ask the question, 3 or 4 years ago, there was an initiative by the Goethe Institute here in India, which was called Poets Translating Poets. And there was even one workshop here in Hyderabad. There was a workshop, I think, in Aizawl, in Trivandrum, and in Mumbai, and so on. Has there been any impact and any sort of insight from that activity, that poets from various parts of India and also from Germany sit together in workshops for a week or so and try to understand and translate into the respective languages? Is there any kind of outcome which you probably would know about?
Yes, good that you brought that question up. It was a beautiful project. It was a wonderful project. I was part of that. I did translations into Malayalam. The project was like this. Poets were sitting with poets and translating. And in between, there was a person who knows the language. That person wouldn't translate, but they would give us a literal translation of the text, just literal. And the poets sit together and talk and listen to the cadence of the language. And then both languages, mutually it was given. So I was translating you, you were translating me. We have a person sitting between us who knows both languages, but not a poet. They insisted that the person was not a poet, so non-poet. It was beautiful because we were listening to the cadences. And, basically it's about sounds, starting from sounds. And also the cultural resonances of what was written was also communicated. That was one of the best projects which actually, brought out the best in both languages, in poetry. And that was at a large level. They did something like 50 poets, and there was a mega reading in Bombay. Wonderful. That's how it should be done. Even within our own languages within India, between Tamil and Malayalam, why do we need an English translation in between? We are losing a lot. In many instances, I think it's best to follow this model. Thank you.
Because Germans have played a big role in Malayalam, development of Malayalam language also, the Gundert dictionary.
Thank you. This is a really fascinating conversation. My name is Ramana, by the way, and I was told that when you translate between languages, your ability to write in your mother language actually improves. The reason for this is it might be the fact that you're now forcing your brain to express thoughts and ideas in different forms which you're not familiar with. So you're really sort of forcing your brain now. So when you come back to your mother language, you actually become more creative in the expression.
Yes.
Now, I was told that this is probably true in the Romance languages, between Italian, French, Spanish, and English. So, two questions. One is, have you experienced this yourself, that when you write in your mother language after translating, that your ability to write improves? And two, is that true between, let us say, a family of languages, let's say either in South India or North India, that your ability to your write also increases? Yeah.
I'll answer the first part. 0. Okay, just quickly. No, because we started late. Neurolinguistics has proved that the more languages you know, the more nimble your brain becomes. And it's also it's also true that linguistics say that it's one of the most fatiguing things to move from one part of the brain to another, because different portions control different languages. And I'd just like to contextualize that answer by saying this: it's not just Romance languages. Or shifting from any language into another will evoke, all your powers and all your experiences. But there's a popular misconception that all you need is 2 languages. You need to be bilingual. I think in literary translation in particular, you need to be also bicultural. Or you have to have the humility to work with somebody who knows at least one of those languages better than you do. And I think some of the most successful translations have been done with a collaborative effort. But if both of you could, by turn,
Can
answer
I?
that.
I would like to, I agree with you, and I would like to add experience in translating very briefly. Like when there are moments and instances where I stumble, as a translator, my language stumbles. And especially, this happens especially when we are translating from older languages, languages with a longer memory, longer history, into a younger language, like Malayalam. Then what happens is that you think the translation is there, but it does not fit seamlessly into my language, or rather the habits of my language. നമ്മൾ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയും ഇത് മലയാളത്തിൽ നിൽക്കുന്നില്ലല്ലോ എന്ന് പറയും. It just doesn't sound good to your ear, habits of your ear. So earlier I used to try to make it fit. These days I don't, because I see this as a challenge and as an opportunity to keep that difference, that uncomfortable difference from the existing language. It's an opportunity to push it a grain forward, an inch forward, the language, the boundaries of our language, little bit. Thank you for asking that question.
I don't think I am fit to answer that question, because my father was in the Air Force and I traveled all over India. My mother she had studied only till 9th standard, so she insisted that from Acha and Amma, all the words should be in Malayalam at home. So from Malayalam, Hindi, English, and whatever language we were in that particular state, I was multilingual. I had to be multilingual. So, translation has always been a very enjoyable exercise for me. And in fact, even when I translate from Malayalam to English, or from English to Malayalam, I also write in Malayalam, and recently I stopped doing it and I'm concentrating on just writing in English, because I found my Malayalam was not that good enough for the Malayalam bhasha experts. But what I find is that I find myself slipping from one language into other. And that is perfectly okay, because that is what a homogeneous India should be. Mini, do I have 2 minutes to talk about Pulethra? Can I? Now, I came here to basically speak about this writer, because I thought he had been marginalized a lot. As I said, this text is his masterpiece. And he, unlike other Dalit writers who speak about oppression of the Dalit caste. Chirakrod was different in the sense that he was the son of a preacher and a second generation Christian, and so he was critiquing not just caste hierarchy, but caste hierarchy within the church in Kerala, which is specific to Kerala. And you can understand that the church is not very democratic in the matter of criticism. When I first read the novel, what I realized was the tonal and stylistic shifts. On the one hand, you had these monosyllabic, tired, exhausted sounds uttered by the Dalits, by the Puler. Then you have the slightly more articulate utterances made by the converts. And finally, you had the authorial voice of the omniscient narrator weaving his way through the text, ranging from strident criticism to emotive and evocative passages that had lyrical cadences. And then it took me some time to understand what Chirakrod was trying to do. He transformed the Dalit's inability to voice his thoughts and feelings into a powerful metaphor to show the denial of identity, the total lack of freedom that they experienced. And the church, of course, exploited them, but everyone exploited. They were exploited, kept alive just to be exploited further, but just enough alive so that they would not dare to dream. And it was this that Chirakrod critiqued. Church, I have already talked, but what I found disturbing and which I wanted to address today is that I have found that even contemporary writers, that too Dalit writers, are refusing to acknowledge this unique feature of the novel. So, it is time we discard our biases, our prejudices, and our fears. And it's time we acknowledge the legitimacy of difference. And that's what Pulethra asks you primarily. How human are you? Look into your heart and assess, evaluate your own humanity. I only hope that Pulethra will have more objective and fairer assessments in future. That's
Thank
all.
you.